Okay, so we want to create a control system for entities to further extract out that code that we have in the main game screen where we are doing this moving player, checking for ADW and spacebar. We're going to use that game input. We have to make a couple changes though. So right now, if we look at our game input, this is only for touch, but since we're not ready to implement touch, we want it to still be able to take some keyboard inputs because we're running off a desktop right now. And if we do this, this would also increase functionality. If you're making it so that you could play it on the Android, but you could also run the file as like a desktop version, you could, do it this way too. So one of the things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to extend the input listener that we were using before. It is, instead of using input listener, if we do input adapter, then it means that we can implement only the things that we want to implement. So if I was to click in this and you're looking, it's an adapter class for the input processor that we can derive and override only the things that we're interested in. And only the stuff that we want is really key down and key up. Okay, so we have that. Let's go ahead and override some methods. We want key down and we want key up. Okay, now key down and key up key down and key up is when you're pressing a key down, we have it do something. When you're taking your hand off the key, it's going to do something else. So this actually, because now we're extending a class, we're going to have to call super. I don't think we got to pass anything into it. Okay, but the super is going to handle those key downs and key ups, and we're just not. Okay, so let's create a couple temporary variables that we're going to run in here. And all we're going to do is, well, super's handling that. We may have to play around with this, but let's do a Boolean key pressed, and it'll start out as false, and we're going to do we're going to create some variables here. So private Boolean left, right, up, down. That way we can get movement. Okay. Left, right, up, and down. We have those. So in here we can do a switch. Come on, I'm recording. Switch, and we want to look for that key code. And inside that key code, we're going to do our cases. So we're going to have case. Let's look at the main game screen. I'm just going to copy this out. Throw this just above here as boom, 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 boom. My kids just woke up. All right. So let's do a case for, we got A, D, W, and space. Let's I'm going to change those a little bit, but case keys dot A, we want to do something, break case keys dot D, we want to do something, break and DW case keys dot W, break, and I'm going to do case dot S for moving down. Input keys dot S and break. Fix that piece. Auto indent lines. Okay. So now in here we can do the same thing, but all we're going to be doing is we're going to say, hey, A is pressed. That means that I need to move left. So left is true, and I process the key. So key processed is true. If D is pressed, that's right. Right is true. Key pressed is true. W is pressed, that's going to be up. Up is true. Key pressed is true. S is pressed, that's down. Down is true. And key pressed is true. Okay, so all that's really doing is it's basically doing some Boolean flags for us for the input. And then this return, when we're returning something, if we want it to trickle down to something else, then we want to return false. If we want to say that we handled that input and we don't want it to look down any other things, then we want to return if it is, we want to return true. So I'm going to return key pressed. So if we got through that through one of these cases and it came back, then we dealt with that input. And then for our up, that's where we reversed. So I'm going to copy this again and put this down here. Okay, so we're starting with key press being false. So if they take their hands off of it, then this is false. If they had their hand on A and they took it off, and then the key is no longer pressed. Or hold on. Okay, I'm going to actually change this. I'm going to refactor the key press because I think that's going to end up getting confused. Let's just rename that to key processed. Processed. Okay, because that makes more sense. And I'm going to do that up here too. Refactor, rename, key processed. Okay. All right. So if they take their hand off of left, then we process that it happened, but we're changing that flag to false. So these should all be true. These should be false. 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 And false. Okay. So that would be the inputs that I need. Now I gotta do some, so let's do some getters and setters for our left, right, up, and down. I guess, you know what, we don't actually need setters for that. Okay, so now if they're using that, so let's do, we have our controller now. We need to put in the controller for the player. So we should have a player controller. That will deal with that movement. So I'm thinking, hold on. Okay, so let's create a player control system. As soon as the computer wants to work. New Java player control system. Okay. This control system is going to use an iterating system. I need to implement the methods. We need a constructor. Okay. I'm not taking in a family, but I am going to pass in. This controller will run. Hold on, Nora. For family.all, and it's going to be anybody that has the player component. Anybody that has the player component, that should work. .get. Remember, the player component doesn't hold anything, but it's kind of acting as a flag, so I know which entity, when it's going through all of them, is the player. Now, my process, when I'm creating this system, I am going to need to have that game input. So let's do a private game input, and when I'm creating it, I'm going to pass in that game input. So this will be this dot game input equals game input. I need to use those mappers. Okay. So now we need to process the entity. So it's going to go through each entity and then deal with it. But for this case, we have only one entity. We know that we're going to have we could do the state, we could do the body. Yep, let's do that, state and body. So state component state component is equal to the mappers dot state component dot get for the entity, and we have our body component. Body component mappers dot body component dot get entity. Okay. So let's look at, let me take that game input that we previously copied you guys' method. I'm going to put that here so I can reference. Okay, so we have when that key is pressed, that we want to move to the left. So I want, let's just do it. If statement. So if game input dot is left, then I'm going to what? I'm going to move. So body component dot get body dot set linear velocity to -1f and 0f. So I'm just transcribing what's happening here. I'm going to copy this. I'm not doing else if, I'm doing if statements because I want it to continue. If they were hitting A and W, I still wanted it to react both ways. So if they're pressing left, if they're pressing up, then what am I doing? That's basically this. Actually, let me just do set linear velocity is right. Just going to go in a circle. And that would be 1, and down. This would be 0. This would be -1. Okay. So when I'm running through my entity, I'm just checking if that game input has left, up, right, or down, then this is what I'm doing for my movement. We're not doing jumping anymore, but we could do it the same way. So that is dealing with okay. And if it's not one of those, I guess we could implement for the space bar to stop movement. I'm going to kind of just leave it, but we could easily just put in another command in that process. Let me just make it look better. Okay. All right. So that allows us in here, and this is where we can actually pick. So if it's left, I'm moving that body to the left. I am saying that that state component dot set direction is moved to direction dot left. Okay, and if the state component is up, then the set direction is up. If state component set direction, that would be right, and this one would be state component dot set direction. This one would be down. Okay. Really? DOWN. Okay, now my movement would change if they're doing that. So if there is no movement, then I should be idle. But if I am, then if state component set state moving, and then let's do if game input is down and game input is right, and I'm doing the opposite. So if there was no input, those should be false. So I want, if all of them are false, then I want him to be reset to idle. Game input dot is down is right is up, and game input dot left. So if there are no inputs from that, then I want my state component to set the state to idle. Okay, so I'm taking one of these inputs and I'm changing it to left, up, right, and down. It's setting my direction. Now, once we start putting graphics in here, though, this could be problematic because it's going to default to the movement. So that state direction I may end up having to do depending on where they're moving more of to get the look that I want. I might end up having to adjust these separately. So if I get the movement, in my code, I had if they were moving more in one direction, so if they were moving more in the Y direction than in the X direction, then they would be facing the way that they would be moving the longest to have it kind of lock in a certain direction. So if they were moving more in the Y direction than in the left direction, it would make more sense for them to be pointing up, even though they're kind of moving a little bit diagonally, compared to if they were moving longer in the Y direction, they were looking left, then it just looks kind of weird because they're running just a little bit facing that direction but moving up. So you could change this, but this is basically just a system that is taking that game inputs and it's processing that information. So in our main game screen, we now have another system. So private player control system, and we create that. And here, player control system equals new player control system, and we got to pass in the game input that we created, up here. Then we got to add it to our system. Okay, so that's our system. The next thing that we would need to do, we could plug in some entities and we could watch that work, or we could plug in another system for dealing with collisions so that we'd be basically back at the same part, but now we're at a point where it should be a lot easier to build things. So if we look here, we have no box 2D debug renderer. We don't have that move player anymore because that's all being dealt with inside the engine. Our code, like for organizing everything, is a whole lot simpler now. We're not using this gravitational forces. Yep. All right. So until the next one, work on this.